And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge, back once again with another short YouTube reading guide series. Today is the first proper video walking through the top Cow Artifactiverse, or as some of you may consider it, the Witchblade universe. To create this guide, I have read the 902 comic issues that comprise the entire Artifactiverse, and more besides, and I've used that knowledge to build the internet's most detailed reading map for this unique corner of modern comics. Now during this series, I'll be using terms such as volume with a big V or small v, and I'll be referring to comic readers that are type P or J, or I'll be referring to other companies and comic series from other comic universes in passing. This can all seem a little overwhelming, but if you do need more guidance on what this all means, just check out the introductory video in this series which will explain all these points. The link for that is in the description below. So with no further ado, let's go here. This is the entire Top Cow Artifactiverse arranged into a single reading map. Let's zoom in, because today we are going to start here, in the section that I've titled Before the Rise. Please remember this is only my own name for this era of the Artifactiverse and not an official title by any means. Just a heads up, there is almost no Witchblade at all in the Before the Rise section. In fact, it might seem like all the comics we'll be discussing today, and in the next video actually, are utterly unrelated to Witchblade. That's an understandable misconception, and all I can do is ask you to trust me. I've made quite a few comprehensive reading guides in my time, and I've included the issues here with some care. Having said that, if you really want to skip all this and start with Witchblade, you can jump straight to video 3, which I'll be posting up in a few days' time, as that is the start of what I've called the Origins era. However, if you do that, please be warned that some of the later comics in the Artifactiverse will start becoming quite confusing if you haven't read the issues in this Before the Rise era. This is true even if you're a more relaxed Type J reader, so consider yourself warned. Okay, let's begin. So, the era I like to call Before the Rise starts here, with Cyberforce Volume 1. That's this top circle here. This was released in 1992 and created by Mark Silvestri. Now, when I say Volume 1, I mean volume with a big V. This was the first run of comics about this group of characters. Now, Cyberforce are quite typical of comics in the early 90s, especially for the fledgling Image Comics publisher. They're a group of tough mercenaries with cybernetic powers, implausible physiques, and pouches all over their outfits. Now, this Volume 1 here was actually quite a short run and only consisted of a handful of issues. It's collected in a few different ways actually. Originally it was collected as a single trade paperback called the Tin Men of War that only had issues 1 to 4. It was then re-released as a trade paperback called Cyberforce Origins Volume 1. That's volume with a small v, as we'll see in a second. This contains issues 1 to 4, issue 0 and the annual. That's the reading order of these in the exact right sequence, by the way, and is the one that I recommend you get. I'm afraid I haven't been able to track down an image of the front cover of that collected trade paperback, no matter how hard I tried. It's pretty difficult to track them down at all, to be honest. One thing I will point out is that issue 3 here, within this first collection, has a brief cameo from Pitt, a character that wasn't published by Top Cow, but was still an early Image comic creation at the same time. Now, I am a huge Pitt fan, but his cameo here is underwhelming. Issue 0 also has a general series of cameos with the Wildstorm universe. As we discussed in the introduction video, this was a separate comics universe, totally separate to Top Cow, but was also a fledgling imprint within Image Comics at the same time. As a general rule, these sorts of crossovers and cameos were pretty common in comics in the 90s, generally to try to cross-pollinate sales from one line to the next. Let's move on. So that's Cyberforce Volume 1 up here. You'll see here the numbering starts again at the number 1. That's because Cyberforce Volume 1 with a big V was followed by Cyberforce Volume with a big V 2. What this means is the numbering reset to issue 1. If you want to buy it, again you have a few options. It was originally collected as 2 smaller trade paperbacks called Killer Instinct and Assault with a Deadly Woman. But to be honest, these aren't worth getting as they miss a few key issues and they're out of print anyway. Instead, you can now buy a trade paperback collection, which you can see here, which is called Cyberforce Origins Volume 2, or as I would prefer to call it, Collection 2, but there we are. What this means is that the spine of the collector's edition is numbered with a 2, even though the issues within start at an issue numbered 1. This is confusing, which is why we need to be very clear about the difference between volumes with a big V, the series, and volumes with a small v, the published collection. Again, I'm afraid I haven't been able to track down an image of the front cover of this collected paperback to show you. What I can show you, however, are the issues that are within it, and you can see this list here. Cyberforce 1, Wildcat 6, Cyberforce 2, Wildcat 7, Cyberforce 3 to 8, and then Cyberforce Origins, Cyblade. By the way, issues 4 to 7 involve in-depth cameos from Stormwatch, which is a super team of the Wildstorm universe. Again, this is a cameo you can relax about. You can still understand it without reading the rest of Stormwatch or diving into the Wildstorm comics universe. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have already realised that the two Wildcats issues here are actually not in the top Cow Artifactiverse at all. Again, they are issues from the Wildstorm universe that have crossed over as part of a crossover event called Killer Instinct. Now, I know that the Type P readers amongst you will be frothing at the bit at this, wanting to know what Wildstorm issues to read and when, in order to make sense of all this. I'm afraid I can't help you. My Wildstorm map is still a work in progress. All I'd recommend is that you take a more relaxed Type J reader approach to this. If you read them in the order that I've shown here, it does make sense and you won't get lost. It made sense to me and I didn't get lost. The only thing you need to know is that the Wildcats are pretty similar to Cyberforce. They're gruff, 90s, militaristic action cliches. Now, as we go down here, we'll come to a trade paperback collection called Cyberforce Origins Volume 3. That's, again, volume with a small v, as it continues to collect issues from the same run and continues the same numbering. Again, I've been unable to track down the image of the front cover of this collected trade paperback. Now, at this point, we do need to take a small pause whilst I make a small confession. I normally do my reading guides by talking about each trade collection one by one. However, in this case, Cyberforce Origins 3 is a total mess. That means I've had to take a slightly different approach. Now, this trade collection collects issues 9 to 16 and then a one-shot. That doesn't work if you read it. The reason for that is because issue 15 ends with a revelation that you really need more context for. As such, I'd recommend that after reading issue 15, you put a hold on your Cyberforce reading and then read a series called Codename Strikeforce, which is being published at the same time. Codename Strikeforce has never been collected in a trade paperback, but I would strongly recommend that you read issues 0 to 14 in that order. And after issue 14, you then also need to read the 2-issue miniseries called Cyberforce Strikeforce Opposing Forces. Again, that's uncollected as well. Now, once you've read all those, you're then ready to dive back into your trade paperback collection, the one called Origins 3, once more, and finish it off by reading issue 16 and then the one-off Cyberforce Origins issue, Striker. Now, I know that's a bit of a mess, so that's why I made this guide. This trade collection we're looking at here, Cyberforce Origins Volume 3, is a total waste of time, and I would recommend that you should only buy it if you're planning on taking it apart and custom binding it with the missing issues inserted. Okay, well, with that out of the way, let's take a short break from Cyberforce and actually do a quick set of short miniseries involving individual team members from that group. This means that next we should read a 3-issue miniseries called Velocity from 1995. This stars the character Velocity, which you would have got to know by now. The only key thing to note here is that there's a short backup story in Cyberforce issue 17, which is key to read between Velocity issue 1 and Velocity issue 2. This is really important, as without this backup, this miniseries actually doesn't make total sense. It's kind of readable, but it doesn't really make total sense. The backup's only a few pages long. It's at the end of issue 17 and features Savage Dragon. Don't panic. Savage Dragon is another Image Comics character from this era. In fact, the comic is still going on today, almost 30 years later, making Savage Dragon and Spawn the only 2 Image Comics that I'm aware of that have survived ever since the company was founded. Don't worry that you don't know anything about the character. The backup makes enough sense to read it without reading enough other Savage Dragon stuff. However, it is key for reading the Velocity mini. And as you can see from the dotted line here, this mini-series remains totally uncollected and you'd have to pick it up in single issues. So after Velocity, I would then recommend that you read the 3-issue Ballistic mini-series here, also from 1995. I'll be honest, this is a mess in terms of story, but the artwork here is early Michael Turner and is absolutely incredible. I point that out because if you're an early Witchblade fan, that name means a lot to you. Ballistic is also a crossover with Wetworks. Now, Wetworks, we haven't mentioned them yet, but they are another Wildstorm universe team like Wildcats or Stormwatch. So again, you've got another crossover event with a different comic company. Again, just relax and roll with it. If you read this and you don't understand this, it's because it's a bad storyline. Ballistic actually isn't a great comic, it's just got great art and it's a slightly confusing crossover with Wetworks, okay? It's not because you haven't read the Wildstorm comics, it's just because it is what it is. And as you can see from the dotted line here, this miniseries criminally remains uncollected and is only available as single issues. Let's keep going. After Ballistic, we've got Ripclaw Volume 1. This is his first miniseries and contains issues 0.5, issues 1, 2 and 3, and then the Ripclaw special. Read them in that order, that's my recommendation. As you can see from the dotted line here, this miniseries remains uncollected, again, unless it's a single issues. Straight after Ripclaw Volume 1, I'd recommend diving straight into Ripclaw Volume 2. This is only 6 issues long, and as you can see from the dotted line here, again, it remains totally uncollected. And finally, this then takes us into Cyberforce Origins Volume 4. Solid line indicating it has been collected as a trade paperback. So that's our 4th trade collection. This collects issues 70 to 23, Annual 2, and then issues 24 and 25. That is the reading order to read these in as well, by the way. Remember that issue 17 has that backup story, which is absolutely key to reading the Velocity mini that we mentioned up here. Again, and like the other trades that I mentioned, I've been unable to get a picture of the front cover of that trade paperback, which is a bit frustrating, but there we are. So that takes us to the end of the very few collected trade paperbacks in the Before the Rise era. So from this point on, all the circles in our map are going to be dotted to represent the fact that I've grouped them by story arc and not by any kind of published collection. On that note, this feels to me like as good a time as any to draw this video to a close. Next time we'll be finishing off the Before the Rise era. As always, this map is available on my website for you to download free of charge. If you want to download it or print it out to follow along, please do so. It covers 902 issues, so I do not blame you. As always, please like, comment and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter, where I tend to post a one-tweet daily review of whatever I read that day. Given I read, on average, around half a dozen comic issues a day, it's a great way to see what I'm up to and to get an idea for what future videos are in the pipeline. If you'd like to support the channel, it's easy. Head over to Amazon and pick up the first volume of my prose superhero novel, No Gods or Kings. This is a story about a world like our own, but where superhumans are a reality, and how the world changes as a result. And it's planned as a series of 9 novels. The first 4 of them are already out. They cost less than $1 each. They're free if you have Kindle Unlimited. And the thing that would mean the most to me is if you could leave a review of it on Amazon. If you'd like to read a free excerpt of the first book, that can be found on the same website as the reading map, which is nogodsorkings.com. The link is in the description below. Until next time, guys, stay classy.